I am Jordan Heidi, and I'm an exposure and response prevention specialist working with clients who struggle with OCD.
And do we have your permission to both record and share this?
Yes.
Awesome. So the first question is, what is your personal experience in getting diagnosed and receiving treatment for OCD?
So the Ybocs was one of the instrumental tools in assessing both the existence of OCD and the severity of OCD. It is kind of used as a benchmark along the treatment process to see how much progress has been made in both the obsessive domain and the compulsive domain. So it was something that was used in my treatment as well to mark progress.
How did you come to find OCD treatment?
Through an OCD support group located here in Seattle. Seattle actually has the largest peer-led OCD support group in the country. And at this support group, they usually borrow somebody from the evidence-based treatment centers of Seattle who is an OCD specialist to come in, provide information and, education about the disorder and the treatment process. So when I attended that group for the first time, that's where I learned about exposure and response prevention, and subsequently went into that particular form of treatment.
Do you still use the Ybocs in your personal treatment?
Yes, so I use it for every client who has already either been diagnosed with OCD or there is a suspicion of a diagnosis of OCD. And so the Ybocs is really great in providing a little bit more in-depth of a picture as to how much suffering and dysfunction they're experiencing, and then also in what categories. So it helps flesh out information about symptoms for providers, and we can use the Ybocs as sort of a template to build treatment upon and establish an exposure hierarchy.
How often do you use the Ybocs with a particular client?
At least twice. So at the start of treatment and then at the end of treatment. If the client requests to take it again, that's totally fine. I have no qualms re-administering it, for a third time. But those tend to be the two places that require, an assessment of severity the most.
What would you say are the strengths and the limitations of the Ybocs in your personal and professional experience?
So the Ybocs does a really good job of breaking down how much dysfunction and impairment is being experienced as a result of OCD symptoms. There's about 5 questions that address obsessions and about 5 questions that address compulsions, and then an entire checklist full of common symptoms. So you get a picture as to how intense the obsessions and compulsions are, and then you get an inventory of different symptom categories and different symptoms within those subtypes that pop up. So as somebody who took the Ybocs as a patient, I found it to be very validating because it was very much echoing what was going on in my life in terms of severity of my intrusive thoughts and how much distress those caused and how much time I spent on compulsions and how much distress that caused. And then, as a clinician, it's very, since I know that it's an accurate assessment of how the OCD pathology works, I feel comfortable in using it, and I use it to inform the patient history when I do an intake and to develop their exposure hierarchy and to kind of figure out what symptoms are at play and what categories and what we need to target. So I think it's a very informative tool. The one place where it has some limitation or there can be essentially false negatives is particularly with individuals with autism. They may not necessarily know what precipitates their compulsions. So in terms of identifying intrusive thoughts or the anxiety that propels compulsions, that can be an area that's difficult for them to discern. So in the part of the Ybocs, the first part that addresses obsessions, they may score 0 for a lot of those different categories. But the compulsions are giving them a tremendous amount of distress, and even though they don't necessarily know what the precipitating factor is, they know they experience, diminished voluntary control to resist doing the compulsions. So it takes a little bit of work with autistic clients to kind of pick out what the core fears are and what kinds of thoughts may be driving the whole obsessive compulsive trajectory for them. So, I use it with a little bit of caution when it comes to individuals who have a known diagnosis of autism or who may be suspected to be on the spectrum. I take the Ybocs kind of with a grain of salt in those situations.
The last question is, several peer-reviewed articles consider the Ybocs the gold standard. Why do you think it's the gold standard?
Again, one from personal experience, just how accurate the questions were about how I was experiencing my OCD and what OCD looks like and how that pathology manifests. I would say that it does a very good job of capturing the OCD mind. And it also identifies sort of spectrums within intrusive thoughts and spectrums within compulsions. And so it's very comprehensive, but is also really succinct in the way that it's constructed and administered. So I would say accuracy, efficacy, those kinds of things, and how much the checklist as well contributes to getting a full client history. I think it's probably, I would say actually by far the most accurate OCD inventory that there is. Every other inventory is misguided in some way, and it would take a while to kind of break those all down as to why. But yeah, the Ybocs, just simply put, it captures the OCD mind very well.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.